You Can Become a Hero by Orphaned Account on AO3. Episode 8, Chapter 6. It Would Take Patience. Dabi completely forgot about the whole interrogation thing after hero duties that day. He was sat in an empty room at the police station, and Deborah waiting outside as the officer held up pictures to him, each with a name or alias attached to it. Currently, he was holding up a picture of Shigaraki, a pen in his other hand. What can you tell us about this man? That he was a stubborn, annoying nerd. No, that's not what they wanted. They wanted motives and stuff. Dabi sighed as he thought back onto all the meetings with the League, remembering how he barely paid attention when Shigaraki went off into his ideals. Instead, he would be drinking himself silly, much to Kirigiri's annoyance. Twice would also be sneaking drinks, but he was too loud and would be caught. That would always result in another fit from the League leader, who ended the meeting in frustration, with nothing getting done. He is the League's leader, I guess. Doesn't like All Might. If he touches you with your hand, you'll pretty much die instantly. Dabi replied, rolling his wrists idly as he went on. The policeman frowned, obviously not getting the answers he was looking for. As should be expected, because it was a vague question. If he wanted information, he should have asked directly what he wanted. What about this girl? Toga. Dabi's hands twitched at the sight of the annoying picture. His mind blanked immediately. He knew exactly what they were looking for this time. What quirk did she have? What was up with her blood and knife obsession? Was she sane? While Dabi knew the answers to all these questions, he'd only willingly answer the last one. Sociopath. What is her quirk? Dabi remained silent as he muddled the idea over his head. Answering wouldn't benefit him as much as he already gave so much information earlier. No one would know how compliant he's been about helping the heroes, so it wouldn't seize the comments he'd been getting on the streets. To some, it would make sense why he wouldn't say it. Twice and Toga's quirks were both unknown by the enemy, but Toga's was special. Right when he joined, he was the first to learn about it. He had promised to not tell anyone because it was so powerful. Twice, while it could only be really used on other villains, was also useful, but Toga's had more wiggle room. If hers were to be found out, the League would be in trouble, knowing in half the battles after all. I don't know. It might have something to do with blood, but she was such a Staney fan. I'm not really certain. Dabi lied, folding his hands before himself calmly. The policeman jotted that down, then lifted another picture to continue their chat. Dabi was released an hour later, and Deborah was waiting just as he had been when he last saw him, sitting in a small chair in the waiting room, glaring at the wall with his arms crossed. He stood as Dabi entered the room, gesturing to the door. Hawks called and asked if you wanted to stay at home tonight. He has a lot of work that needs to be done, so it's either there or in that office all night. If the office was a real choice, he would have taken it in a heartbeat. The carpet was uncomfortable, but he didn't really want to go home. But again, it was a friendly suggestion. It was obviously not meant to be taken seriously. Dabi nodded his head, following Endeavor out on the car waiting for them. He sat as far away from him as possible, cramming himself right against the door as the driver pulled out of the police station. Engie lived 20 minutes from the station. Smooth jazz echoed through the car to fill the tension. Dabi felt as he got closer and closer to the place he avoided for years. He dreaded seeing the familiar entryway that would ruin through every morning, track mud through the house. It annoyed the servants to no end, but it gave them something to do with their basic chores when they were done. One of them would always make him go to the washroom, wash up and change, chiding him into promising to stay inside for the rest of the day. When he entered into the gachi, he placed his shoes down and waited for them to be greeted by one of the maids. However, no one came to greet them. Instead, Engie walked past him towards where the family room was. Dabi followed, noting a school bag haphazardly thrown onto the sofa and scattered papers around the coffee table. Maids are slacking. I got rid of them. Oh. Dabi folded his arms and looked away as Endeavor turned to him, gesturing broadly. I will be making dinner soon. You can help if you want, or see Fuyumi and Shoto. They are around here somewhere. Maybe Natsuo as well. Your room has few changes of clothes on the dresser. With that, Engie headed off into his own room, likely to change out of his own hero outfit. Dabi stared incredulously at his retreating form. He was going to make dinner. That sounded like something straight out of a fairy tale. A family as close could be, the father making food on the grill, with the mother draped over his shoulder, the kids playing without a care in the world, like there weren't people ready to down their lives to destroy peace at all costs. People like Dobby, or it didn't matter. Dobby stalked off to his room. As mentioned, a pile of clothes was waiting for him. He took off his hero costume, tossing it hazardly onto his old bed. He pulled on a sweater and pants, then headed off. He aimlessly wandered the halls, noting all the little things that had changed. There wasn't that many, except there was now a bundle of flowers in a vase in the hallway. Nothing was dusted, and there was almost a homey appeal to the house that once seemed out of a magazine. It felt lived in. It felt good. It felt complete. Dobby tugged at his sleeves as he walked down the hall. Passing a cracked door, he glanced in to see his sister and younger brother were sitting on the ground, surrounded by textbooks. He paused. Fuyumi had grown up so much. She was now a capable young woman. Nothing like the teary-eyed girl she used to be, constantly tattling on the others to Ray. Instead of being the frail, skinny child of the group, she had gotten a little chubby over the years. Fuyumi looked kind and warm, despite the fact that she always had a cold touch that would send shivers up anyone's spine. Beside her was Shoto. He had never seen him before a mission or two, but he hadn't gotten a good look until then. Ignoring the scar marging his face, Dobby watched as he knitted his brows together, pointing towards a problem. So I don't abide it. Fuyumi shook her head, beginning to draw a picture to explain it. Looking closely, Dabi easily seed her old bossy self, forcing their younger sibling to play house with her, while Natsuo and he played terrible constructed fighting games nearby. Shoto always seemed content to be babied by Fuyumi, as she would give him sweets, and wouldn't roughhouse him after training sessions with Enji. Dabi felt a bit bad at the time, but eventually they all grew apart. It was like Shoto was on a pedestal none of them could reach. If this method doesn't work, we could find a different one that makes sense. Fuyumi smiled as Shoto struggled to write down the problem, frustration just barely noticeable on his face. Not everything works for everyone. That doesn't mean we're gonna give up, right? Dabi headed to the kitchen. Peeking in to see Enji was, indeed, making food. His hands held onions steadily as he chopped. Eyes glued on the cutting board. Each cut rang loudly through the kitchen. The slices weren't all the same. Most were different sizes or cut at an angle. Did you come here to help? Dabi shook his head. Good. Then you can get a large frying pan and heat it up on the stove. Dabi grunted reluctantly, going to the counter and grabbing out a cupboard. He placed it on the stove and heated it up. Angie looked over and pointed to a stack of ingredients and a piece of paper. You can get started with that. With that, he moved to the onions to a bowl, and then by the oven. Grabbing a piece of meat that was lying nearby to cut it, Dabi frowned and picked up a dashi packet. I don't know how to fucking cook. He was met with no response. Dabi huffed, tossing the packet onto the counter once more. The sound of chopping filled the space between them, as he waited for Endeavor to yell at him to do something or to leave so he wasn't a distraction in the kitchen. However, the man remained quiet as he worked, focused intently on cutting the meat into thin strips. Dabi leaned against the stove, the flames giving him a little extra warmth. Can't we just put a cold pizza in or something? Order takeout? That made the man pause. Slowly, Endeavor set the knife down and faced Dabi. Part of the villain was revealing in a way he was, and how he saw Endeavor's eyebrows twitching. The stoic face was going to give away any minute to show his annoyance. It would show his regret for letting Dabi out. Hell, he almost killed a man earlier, because he was upset. The moment he stepped back into this house, Endeavor must have realized that his family is best with only 5 members. The oldest son was dead. He didn't have a place in there except for a room with a bed too small to fit the boy. No. The man any longer. Endeavor would tell him to leave, that it isn't working. Dabi would be free, either to be a villain or to go back to see Hawks. He didn't know, but he knew he'd be released from the house. That was certain. Endeavor raised a hand and grabbed the dashi pack, mulling it over his large hand. What you have to do is pour it into the pan with some water, and it makes the dashi instantly. Then you have to pour some of the sake, mirin, sugar, and soy sauce. Once you stir it up, cover it. Do you need me to help you? Dabi's brain short-circuited. Endeavor? Help him? A hysterical laugh left his mouth, completely against his will, as he stared up at the hero, eyes wide with disbelief. He hated the nervous edge to his tone as his laughter died down. Are you can't be fucking serious. Endeavor nodded, uncertainly, an awkward movement of his hands as he motioned to the ingredients. I might be a little off on the ingredients. You'll have to read the recipe here, but yes, I am serious. You fired all your workers, Dabi began. And you are only just acting like a father? I've made mistakes. Enji admitted lowly as he began to make the dashi himself. I know nothing I did can make up for the years of... I can't atone for my past errors, but I will try anyways. Even if all I can do is make a homemade meal for my family. It's all I've got. Dabi watched as Enji continued to pour in the ingredients. Yes, it'll be easier to throw some store-bought meal on the table. Maybe no one can tell the difference in the end between the two. Enji chuckled beneath his breath as he humorously added, some may even prefer that over what I make. I've only just started learning, but it is Greek to me. So just give up. Put in a pizza. Dabi took a step closer as he watched the sugar dissolve into the sauce before a lid was placed over the sauce. He grabbed the bowls of onions and held it out to Dabi, who took it in his clammy hands. Put in a little effort and see. Dabi read through the instructions for the Gurun and how to cook the onions. He spread them throughout the pan and used a fork to move them around every so often until they started to become tender. Just as the recipe said. He turned towards Enji, eyes lingering on the pan as he set his fork down. Done. Enji poured the meat into another bowl and headed over. He was just about to pour the meat in, but then paused. Where's the sauce? Dabi looked down and noticed the sauce was gone. It had evaporated as he cooked the onions. He could feel his fist tightened at the side, unable to comprehend how he hadn't noticed. Why didn't he stop it in time? Did he just fucking ruin this stupid dish because he didn't put the lid on it? He couldn't get something like this right when he had instructions. Tensing, Dabi moved to turn away and leave, but stopped cold as MB mumbled. I'm happy I'm not the only one who makes that mistake. What? Dabi glared at him from the corner of his eye as the man continued, grabbing out another pan and starting up the recipe again. Without pausing, he handed Dabi the sugar and a measuring utensil so he could easily busy himself with pouring the packet back in. Every recipe I look, I never say anything about what that happened. I've failed so many times, trying to remember. I guess my memory is waning. Then again, how am I supposed to recall what I wasn't taught? Dabi dumped the sugar into the pan wordlessly as Enji continued. It's like good and evil. We struggle with it because we were never taught what those words truly meant. My father was a bad teacher, and I was a horrible father in return. Good and evil and all that bullshit has nothing to do with cooking. Dabi grumbled, if only for the fact that he didn't know what else to say. Enji nodded to that and poured the onions into the newly made sauce. He poured the meat in after, covering it once more firmly. While he waited for the meat to cool, he began cooking rice on the stove next to the pan. A home-cooked meal is warm and filled with love and effort. Enji replied, undoubtedly something Ray must have said whenever he got frustrated on his cooking adventures. It heals weak spirits at the end of the day and brings people together. That sounds fake. Enji shrugged half-heartedly, not turning to Dabi as he offhandedly wondered out loud. I bet Hawks would appreciate a homemade meal. It was a weird thing to mention, but Dabi kept it in the back of his mind, if only to busy himself while he did the mindless task of assisting Enji in carrying the pots and bowls into the dining room. He set the table as Enji went to call everyone down. For once, as he stared at the set before him and the footsteps heading towards the dining room, he felt like maybe he belonged. Perhaps he was just dreaming, and he was Toya, only a little kid with 2 little feet. But this time, he was a version outside of his father's shadow. They were on the same level. The idea was ridiculous, but he didn't dive into it as Fuyumi entered the room. She eyed the table with a smile, then glanced up to see he was standing nearby, hovering awkwardly. He wasn't certain if they had designed seats like they used to have. He knew where his seat was usually, but it was gone from the table, an empty space sitting there instead. Fuyumi smiled as she walked over. Welcome back. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, hugging him close. Dabi still wasn't used to the affection from his family, but patted her back with one hand, arm resting lightly around her body in the shittiest hug known to man. Fuyumi laughed at that, but it sounded strange. Seconds later, she was trembling, hands gripping tighter at his sweater. He didn't know what to do as she pulled away, tears forming in her eyes as she whispered, If you leave again, I'm gonna kick you. Dabi took the threat seriously, nodding as she pulled away to wipe at her tears. Perhaps she was still the crybaby he used to know. Don't intend on it. Her lips trembled as she smiled, trying to sniffle back oncoming waterworks. We need to talk sometime. I thought you were dead and you've been gone for over 10 years. When you left, nothing was the same. As she finished, Shoto and Enji walked into the dining room. Shoto spotted Dabi immediately, but instead went to sat down at the table. Digging in, Enji sat down. Fuyumi followed, as she said, Natsuo and Mom are running errands. You can sit everywhere. We had to move your chair because it was too... We couldn't look at it. A lump formed in Dabi's throat as he sat in Natsuo's seat, taking his bowl to get some food as Enji told the table about how their meal was cooked by the oldest brother. Dabi wanted to cut in and deny it, as it was the honest thing to do. Not that that mattered much to him in the past. However, Enji put a finger around his mouth as if to tell the villain to keep it quiet. After the meal, Fuyumi praised his abilities and offered her assistant if needed any help recuperating to his new life. Shoto nodded to him once, saying the food was good, then left. Dabi didn't take offense to the coldness, since that was normal Shoto behavior, even as a kid. If he really had an issue with Dabi's presence, he'd approach him sooner or later. Either way, Dabi was finally beginning to understand what Enji was saying about cooking. Fuyumi and Shoto both ate lots of food, eagerly reaching for seconds of the relatively easy dish. It swelled his heart with pride that he could at least cook the onions right, even if the first sauce was a flop. They didn't even know that, though. As they cleaned up the rest of the gyudon, Dabi entertained a previous thought Enji had mentioned. Was Hawk still sitting in his office? Was he eating vending machine cup of noodles while he was stuffed full? An uncomfortable feeling settled in his stomach as he set the dishes into the sink. Enji began washing them for her as Dabi walked around the kitchen. Upon spotting a cookbook nearby, his villain side rose. He swiped it, heading back to his room with the book tucked under his arm. He sat up for a while, scanning through the pages, eventually ripping one out. He tucked it into his hero costume, then snuck into the kitchen to return the book. Okay, I kinda like that. Are we gonna get Dabi cooks Hawks a homemade meal? Because if so, I am so for that. Also, I'm pretty sure I cut this in a really weird position. I was supposed to not let this go into 18 minutes because I'm pretty sure this was going to be like 30 minutes max. So it was going to be 15, but I think I fucked it up. So now I think the next one is probably going to be, 12, 11 minutes? Around there. So sorry about that. I cut it in a weird position, but in my defense, that was literally the only area I could find to cut it. So I cut it there. I cannot wait for the next chapter. Is Dabi gonna cook Hawks a homemade meal? Oh my god. Wait, hold up. Endeavor, why the fuck did you say that to begin with? What are you saying? Also, Endeavor, I do not like your ass, but thank you for advancing the ship. I still hate you. Anyways, I was about to say next chapter is called, but next chapter is just this chapter, so yeah. Anyways, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.